A journey.
Hi everyone, another journey. Today's journey features, and I've got my notes, and it's only a small bit of notes in a, and it says in the notes, in a fast-paced corporate arena, our guest has emerged as a pivotal figure. He is renowned as a mentor, men's coach, speaker, and author. He also guides high-performing men away from the brink of professional burnout, which I know personally myself, towards a state of balance and fulfillment. That's what I'm going to read because it's not my journey I'm talking about is about Matthew who's joining us today. Welcome, Matthew.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
You're welcome. So I touched upon your bio there, but we're not going to go into your bio straight away because I want to know about what started your journey. Now, I can make a joke here, and I didn't say this pre-recording because it sounds funny when I say it off the cuff. Everyone has a journey, and the earliest memory people say, yes, I was born. But
Right.
what was your earliest memory that got you into your journey?
Um, that's kind of a tough question to answer. I mean, I go back to one of my earliest memories, period, was being a toddler in a house that my parents were renting. And at the time, I remember very distinctly having some adults coming into the house and walking down the hallway. And I remember bumping up against the wall and trying to stay out of the way and not be a nuisance. And that's my earliest memory. And my wife and I joke about this sometimes because I've heard in different arenas or different bodies of thought that your earliest memory tends to reflect or be indicative of like your journey in life. And I wonder about that sometimes because, if the feeling that I got there as a toddler was that I'm in the way or that, I'm a bit of a nuisance, I wonder to what extent that's factored into my role in life and the tendency to not want to put myself out there or be seen or be heard, and to how much that's kind of like factored into some of the decisions that I've made even today as an adult. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I understand this is my personal opinion about how things are. Yes, certain things do reflect, but at the same time, it's a small definition in comparison to where you see yourself as you get older. And when you're a teenager, you see life differently. When you're a young adult, I say young adult as in 17, 18, you see life differently again. So there's a lot of constant change, even from an early age, until you're ready for employment per se.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And, going back to my childhood there, I had a great childhood. I had two parents that loved me very much. I grew up in, safe environment and a loving family with two younger sisters. And, my parents really tried to instill upon me some really positive beliefs. And one of the ones that I reflect back upon sometimes is this idea that uh, I was often taught or told that like I was really smart and that I was really capable and that I could do anything that I wanted.
Mm.
And, that seems like a really positive thing. And, and I would hope that most kids would grow up with that kind of attitude and that kind of belief in themselves. And it's kind of funny though, because it's almost a bit of a double-edged sword, or it has been in my experience anyway. And what I mean is that, like, I spent a lot of my 20s thinking, well, maybe I could go to school to be a lawyer. That was part of my plan. A lot of my family are lawyers, and in some cases, it kind of felt like that was the expected norm. But there was a part of me that thought, well, maybe I would like to be a police officer. I actually thought about doing being on the K9 unit. I thought, how cool would that be to be, a police officer and working with dogs and doing the K9. And then there was another part of me that wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I thought that it might be really neat to own a little store and, sell ice cream and fireworks at the lake and, have that lifestyle. And I kind of waffled back and forth on some of these different ideas for a long time. And at the time, I was bartending, which was a great way to, earn a living at the time, and met some really interesting people. But I was always afraid that, like, well, I could do any one of these things, but what if I chose wrong or made the wrong decision and got halfway down that path and realized that it wasn't what I wanted to do and decided to change my mind? And, I kind of think back about those times and I wonder, man, sometimes indecision is the worst decision, isn't it? And I think about how much time I don't know if I'd use the word wasted, but spent in my 20s just kind of spinning my wheels, doing the same thing, afraid to make a decision out of fear of failure. And by the time I got to be, close to 30, I realized that I had almost failed by default because I hadn't made any decision. And I kind of started to panic a little bit, when you're in your 20s and you're young and naive and optimistic, you got your whole life in front of you. And then slowly but surely you get to the point where it's like, you start bumping up against your 30s and your 40s and so on. And you start to wonder, what am I really doing here? You know, I don't
So
know. At least that's my experience
yeah,
anyway.
and you were saying about in your bio about burnout. Even when you are indecisive, you do experience the burnout because your mind is over and over, thinking mentally as well as physically.
Oh,
So
100%. That indecision is a heavy burden. And one thing that I've often said is that, that sitting on the fence where you got one foot in and one foot out is a very uncomfortable place to be. And like I said, one of the earliest mentors that I ever had, he said the indecision is the worst decision. And one of the best things that you can do is just make a decision and start moving forward with it. At least then you'll learn something in the process. And it's not necessarily a matter of making the right decision, because we'll never know. Like, it's hard to know in the moment all the time, but it's about making a decision and then making it right and
mm,
learning from the experience and continuing to move forward. But you don't learn anything when you're sitting still or sitting on the fence.
yeah, and I know that from my own time when I was growing up. I was I had a lot of options open to me, but because I chose to stayed dormant for so long and I didn't actively do anything about it. I was always in that loop of I can't. And then I got told there's no such word as can't. So I couldn't use that constantly, but it's like I can't do this, I must can't I was always putting myself down to an element that I still do in certain aspects now. And I get told, don't put yourself down because you are better than that. You can do it. And it's about those people helping me believe that. That makes me stronger.
Yeah. And that self-talk is so, so important, isn't it? You know,
Very important.
I find that in the conversations that I have with clients today, one of the things that I've observed is that a lot of people are in the habit of doing what I call self-rejecting. Well, they'll have an idea or a goal or something that they'd really like to do. And then the very next thought that comes to their mind is, well, I can't do that. Or they'll start listing off a bunch of reasons why that won't happen or why they couldn't or shouldn't. And they stop themselves before they even give themselves an opportunity to even try. And I feel like if you can just flip that script and change that inner dialogue to be from a little bit less negative to even neutral. It doesn't even need to necessarily be positive, just neutral can be a game changer as far as your thoughts, your emotions, and the subsequent behaviors that you experience. So, yeah, that's huge, and that's something that I think a lot of people really struggle with is just that inner dialogue and that conversations with themselves when no one else is around.
Yeah. And, you know, I like talking about my journey in life. And classic example, when I was in school, I always doubted myself, even in school. And, I had contact with a teacher who I'm still friends with now because he helped me a lot. And I worked with him in my work career as well. And he said, from where you was when I first met you, and even when I first started, radio, when I was at the radio station in England, they said you were a shy, withdrawn person who wouldn't say anything to anyone. And I said, that's because that's me. But then they saw over the progression of me from being in school to the time I was leaving the radio station. They said, well, gone are those days where David's hiding in the corner. David's actually out there, his thumbs up. He's doing something. You can be proud of that, David. I said, yeah, but there's still that element. So there's always still that element, even if I know I'm being successful. It's always the element of I'm not being successful because it's the little doubt of I could do that better.
Right, right. And I think that when it comes to characteristics or attributes like that, I think some people are naturally either more gifted or more talented, or have some of those traits that come a little bit easier. But that's not to say that we couldn't all develop some of those characteristics or some of those habits or the willingness to put ourselves out there, to raise our hand, to share a comment or ask a question or to be verbal or to take action. And I think that the danger lies sometimes, David, when we internalize that, when we hear people say, well, that's who you are, you've always been shy. And we internalize that and accept that, and then that becomes a part of our identity. To a certain extent, sometimes that kind of thing can almost then become a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I know personally growing up, I was one that I was pretty shy and kind of introverted, and I still am to a certain extent. But I know that it's important if I've got a mission and a message that I need to be willing to at least try to do things like this and show up and meet strangers and have conversations and put myself out there. And little bit by little bit by little bit, some of the feedback that I get allows me to look and be like, well, maybe I'm have a tendency to be shy, but there's also situations and circumstances where I can be outgoing, where I can be personable, and it can be an extrovert. And so maybe there's a little bit of both of that in me. And being able to honor that and then try to cultivate and grow those characteristics or those personality traits that I want to improve upon. Because it's a process, isn't it? And I mean,
Yeah,
that's me. It's about constant, continual growth and evolution, and just even making an effort to be intentional about the growth that I want to experience. And so those are the kinds of things that I need to be careful of myself as far as what I accept and what I tell myself and how I'm showing up.
yeah. So going into the present now, we talk about your career as a whole. Do you
Right.
feel like you've come across certain people that are similar to your background of how you saw your life growing as you were maturing in your job?
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
Basically, clarification is basically when you was started your job where what you're doing now with the helping others. Did
Right.
you often relate to people in the same way, saying, "I know how that is because I've been there myself."
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, technically I'm a coach. I'm a men's coach and a mindset mentor. Okay. But I've in the past historically kind of resisted the term coach and seen myself more of as a guide. And the reason is because, yeah, you can read all sorts of things in textbooks and learn in classroom settings and situations and things like that. But I have a tendency to stick to what I know and what I've experienced firsthand. And I've found the more that I share my experience, the ups and downs, the trials and errors, and the tears and frustration, the more that people tend to relate to that. And the more willing I am to speak about some of those, like either shortcomings or fears or failures, the more people come out of the woodworks to say, hey, you know what? I experienced that too. And I'm in that right now. And that's when I feel the most capable or the most, in the best position to be able to share some of the things that I've learned through that experience and then to help them come through that. And personally, I think that even just some of that community and that connection is so important. And in the past, I've found that when I'm going through challenges or when I'm experiencing struggle in my life, I have this tendency to believe or think that I'm the only person that's ever gone through this and that nobody else can relate to what I'm experiencing now. And that I'm some kind of third-eyed weirdo for even feeling this way. And I have a tendency sometimes to want to withdraw or pull back and isolate myself. And I've learned that that's actually when I need to reach out the most and ask for support and connect with others and have people speak some either perspective or some positivity or some encouragement. And I find incredible strength in that. And so that's, I've benefited immensely from having mentors and coaches and friends and family in my life that I can turn to for that. And that's my aim, to be able to, pass that along in any way, shape, or form that I can. And sometimes that's with friends, sometimes that's with clients, sometimes that's with family. Family's a little bit tougher though. They're usually a little less a little more resistant and a less likely to be open to ideas and that sort of thing. So
Yeah, and you specifically talk about helping men. Do you
right.
find that men are more, and this is speaking for myself as well, do you find men are more stubborn in admitting their issues sometimes in understanding their own thinking?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And I think the answer to that is yes and no. But I've certainly experienced somewhat of an uphill battle with it. And I think that traditionally, men, whether it be consciously or unconsciously, have kind of been taught things like, well, we need to tough it out, or we got to do it on our own, or hey, that's just what guys do. And we have this kind of tendency to stuff things down and to not be open or not share and not be vulnerable. And so there is this kind of mentality, and maybe it's a bit of a stigma out there that some men are really attached to. And oftentimes, one of the things that was taught to me or was said to me a long time ago, when I said to my mentor, I said, I think I'm good. I can figure this out. Like, I got this. He looked at me real squarely and he said, Matt, it's your thinking that got you into this situation. What makes you think that your thinking is going to get you out of this situation? And that kind of took me for a curve. And I thought, that's a great point. And the truth is that, different outputs require different inputs. And sometimes we need new people or different people to share new ideas to help us reframe things and think differently and therefore act differently in order to produce a different result. So I think that some men, there's certainly that resistance around that.
Mm.
Okay. But then I find that there's also an a different group of men who have already come to that point where they realize, hey, you know what? I don't have to try to do this on my own. And maybe there are people out there who know things that I don't. And if I can learn from them, whether that be books or YouTube or teachers or coaches or mentors, think of the time and the struggle and the heartbreak that could save me.
Yeah, I totally get that. So going into the future, do you think how you, excuse me, do you think how you develop your skills will be better? Do you think they will stay the same, or do you think you're ever changing your thought process as you go?
Oh, well, I would hope that I'm continually improving and sharpening my sword, so to speak. And the reason I say that is because, I look back at even things that I've created and content that I made and videos that I've recorded and things like that from a year or two ago. And I kind of cringe a little, being like, oh, that was so amateur. And I realized that, well, you know what? That's a part of it. And, in order to get really good at something, you got to be willing to suck at it at first. And I remember the first time I did a podcast, I was so nervous. I was like, shaking in my boots. But with repetition and with practice, you get more comfortable, and, hopefully I improve a little bit. And same with anything. And I think that if you're waiting until you feel ready, or you're waiting until everything's perfect, I think that perfectionism is in a lot of cases a form of procrastination.
Mm.
And again, it can stop us from starting uh, before we ever even try. And so being willing to show up and try something new and fail and fumble and then pick yourself up and make a little bit of progress. The learning is in the doing, I
Yeah.
say. And I hope that, no, I'm not, I take that back. I don't hope. I know that in 5 years from now, in 10 years from now, and in 20 years from now, I will have grown and cultivated the mindset and the skill set of a master. And I
Mhm.
know that because I've seen it in my mind, and I've said it thousands of times to myself, and I've been there in my mind already. Now it's just a matter of continuing to show up each and every day,
Yeah,
putting in the reps and getting the practice.
I get that. It's like you saying about growing and progressing. I remember when I first started recording podcasts, it was a very basic setup. I'm not saying
Right.
I've got a brilliant setup now, but I made it better over time because I got used to what's around me.
Of
And
course.
then being on the radio, when I was first on the radio back many, I forgot what year it was late 2009, I think it was. I had to do the news on that particular day as well. So the news was pre-recorded, thankfully, but I listened back at it and I said for the weather that particular day a certain word, and I said it in such a way that it didn't make sense to the whole weather. So the context of me being embarrassed all day because I said the wrong word for the weather. So instead of one way of putting it, I put it the other way, and it made the weather completely funny just to hear. But I couldn't change it because it was already done.
Sure. Yeah.
But I learned. But I learned from that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and all of those are learning opportunities, and you don't get those learning opportunities when you're on the sidelines. And so you got to get in the ring, you got to get in the game. And sometimes I think I don't even want to say half the battle. Sometimes I think that just showing up is like 90% of it.
Yeah. So I know people. I will aim this especially at men because I know you provide men. But if there's anyone out there, is there any way they could reach out to you and ask you for further advice, or just reach out and get some guidance from you at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm most active on Instagram, and my handle is at matt.jodouin, Jodouin. And I've regularly do free workshops where I invite people to come and join me live for an experience. And we do a number of different activities and exercises to get people thinking. And I also have a free community on School. Are you familiar with the platform School?
I've heard of it.
Okay, so School is spelled Skool, and I have a free community called Mindful Men, and it's a really great opportunity to do a couple of things. I share some really powerful content and some trainings that have been hugely beneficial for me and in my life. But it's also a great spot to have some connection, some conversation, and some camaraderie with other like-minded men. And one of the things that I kind of come back to in a lot of my philosophy and a lot of my teaching is that, if you think about it, for thousands of years, men have gathered around the campfire. in different cultures throughout history, and we've learned from one another, we've shared with one another, and we've supported each other through this thing called life. And I think that that's one thing that's sorely missing in today's society, especially in the Western world. We really tend to idolize and prioritize the individual and the so-called self-made man. But I'll tell you, in my experience, there is no such thing as a self-made man. And nobody gets to the top of the mountain by themselves. And I find that, just like iron sharpens iron, when men specifically, but people in general, come together and share experiences, we're stronger together.
Mm.
We can learn from one another. And I think that that's something that, I mean, I don't know about you, David, but like social media has this tendency to, from the surface level, bring people closer together. But I think that what we experience is that it's actually creating a lot more isolation in some cases. And to be able to circumvent that a little bit and do something different, in my opinion and in my experience, has been very valuable. And so that's something that I try to cultivate too, is just connection, conversation, camaraderie with either friends, clients, and sometimes clients become friends and that sort of thing too. But I think that's really important and something I've certainly benefited from in the past,
Yeah.
and yeah, so I look back at different times in my life where I felt lost, where I was struggling. You mentioned burnout, and that's something I certainly experienced. And I know that I probably would not be, I know for a fact, I would not be where I am today, doing what I'm doing today, if it were not for the support and the accountability of some people around me that took it upon themselves to encourage me when I needed it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So to end this interview, I always like to end on a positive, and usually it's a positive message I would want you to share. What positive message, and I'm like we said, this is mainly aimed at men, but it can apply to women as well. But what inspiration would you give to those watching, stroke, listening?
Hmm. Um, well, there's a lot of things that come to mind, but one thing that really jumps out is that I'll maybe share this, that they say that if you want to help yourself, help somebody else, and if you want to help somebody else, do something for yourself. And the reason I say that is because one of my mentors a long, long time ago shared with me that he said, "You want to solve 99% of your problems, Matt?" And I was like, "Yes, of course. Who doesn't?" He said, "You want to solve 99% of your problems? Stop thinking about yourself so much." And at the time, it kind of stung. Okay. And that advice, kind of hurt. But I think it's accurate in the sense that when I get outside of myself and I try to serve another person and I try to go out of my way to help somebody else, it's really rewarding. And they say that, giving is better than receiving. And I never believed that as a kid, but I think that it's true. And that anytime I've helped another person, I always have a tendency to feel better about myself. And likewise, if I really want to be the best version of me for my family and I want to show up as the best dad, the best husband, the best partner, the best, so on and so forth, I need to make sure that I'm carving out some time for myself to take care of myself because, like they say, you can't pour from an empty cup. And when you're on the airplane and they're giving you those instructions about, takeoff and landing, they always tell you to put your oxygen mask on first. Because if you can't help yourself, you can't be of much use to those around you. And I've got myself into situations in the past where I worked myself into the ground and I experienced burnout and wasn't taking care of myself. And I actually was self-destructive with some of my habits and some of my thinking. And it almost got to the point where it was a real burden for my family and my wife and my two young sons. And so that point that I was making there, if you want to do something for yourself, help another human being. And if you want to do something for those around you, make sure that you're taking care of yourself.
I agree totally. Like I said, I'll make sure I put all the links in the description where this will be shared, and I'll ask you if it's possible. Can you email the school site to me, and then I can add that.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. I'd be happy
but
to.
thank you for sharing your journey with me today.
Of
I hope
course.
it carries on being successful. I hope we help individuals with a lot of things because we have covered anything is possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree, David.
And thank you.
Thank you.
That was The Journey, hosted by David Hackett. Produced and edited by Wise Words Imaging, all rights reserved.